Let me tell you a story about my spa pool and the woman who decided it was hers as much as mine. Her name is Karen, and if you've ever heard someone say, "Don't be a Karen," trust me, they're talking about her. It all started when I bought this cozy little house with a backyard spa pool. I worked hard for it, long hours at the office, saving every penny. And finally, I had my own space to relax. Or so I thought. At first, Karen seemed harmless enough. She lived 2 doors down and would wave whenever we crossed paths. She'd comment on how nice my garden looked or ask what kind of flowers I planted. Friendly, right? But then one evening, everything changed. I was sitting in my spa pool after a long day at work, just minding my own business, when I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could even turn around, there she was, Karen, standing in my yard like she owned the place. "Oh, hi," she said cheerfully, already walking toward the spa. "I didn't know you used this so much. Mind if I join?" My mouth dropped open. Did she really think she could just walk into my backyard and use my personal spa? I wasn't sure how to respond. Before I could say anything, she'd taken off her shoes, grabbed a towel from her bag, and climbed in. Just like that. Like she belonged there. For the next hour, she talked nonstop about her job, her kids, her dog, her favorite TV shows. By the time she finally left, I felt more exhausted than before I got in the water. I told myself it was a one-time thing. Maybe she misunderstood or thought I wouldn't mind. Surely, she wouldn't come back without being invited, right? Wrong. The very next evening, Karen showed up again. This time, she brought snacks. "Thought I'd bring something to share," she said, plopping herself down beside me like she'd been doing it for years. I tried to smile, but inside, I was fuming. My spa pool was supposed to be my escape, not a shared community resource. Still, I didn't want to make a scene. So I stayed quiet and hoped she'd get the hint. But Karen didn't take hints. Over the next few weeks, she became a regular visitor. Every single evening, like clockwork, she'd show up, ready to soak. Sometimes she'd bring friends. Other times, she'd talk endlessly about things I had no interest in. The worst part, she acted like it was completely normal. Like my spa pool wasn't private property but some public amenity everyone could use. I started dreading coming home. Instead of looking forward to relaxing in my spa, I found myself peeking out the window to see if Karen's car was parked outside. If it was, I'd stay inside, avoiding my own backyard. It sounds ridiculous now, but that's how bad it got. My peaceful retreat had turned into a source of stress, all because of Karen. One night, after another unexpected visit, I sat in my living room staring at the spa through the window. The warm lights reflected off the water, and I sighed. This wasn't fair. I paid for this house. I worked for this spa pool. Why should I have to give it up just because Karen decided she liked it too? That's when I realized something needed to change. I couldn't keep letting her invade my space. Not anymore. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Karen wasn't going to stop unless I made her. So I decided to try setting boundaries, nicely, of course. After all, maybe she didn't realize how much her constant visits were bothering me. Maybe she thought we were closer friends than we actually were. I convinced myself that a polite conversation would fix everything. The next time Karen showed up uninvited, I took a deep breath and smiled as warmly as I could. "Hey, Karen," I began, keeping my tone light. "Can I talk to you about something?" She paused mid-sentence. She'd been rambling about her neighbor's landscaping and gave me a curious look. "Sure, what's up?" "Well," I started, choosing my words carefully. "I really appreciate that you enjoy spending time here, but this spa pool is kind of my personal space. It's where I go to unwind after work, you know. So I was hoping we could maybe limit your visits to times when I invite you over." There. I'd said it. I braced myself for her reaction, expecting her to apologize or at least acknowledge that she'd overstepped. Instead, she laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Don't be silly, she said, waving a hand dismissively. Sharing is caring, right? Besides, it's not like you're using it that asterisk often. My stomach sank. Had she not heard a word I said? Or did she just not care? I tried again, firmer this time. Karen, I'm serious. This is my property, and I need some alone time. I can't relax if I'm constantly worrying about who might show up. She tilted her head, studying me like I'd just spoken another language. Then she smirked. You're overthinking it. Honestly, I think you'll feel better once you loosen up a little. Trust me, having company is good for you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only had she completely ignored my request, but she was also acting like she knew what was best for me. My frustration bubbled under the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. Arguing wouldn't solve anything, at least not yet. For now, I needed to figure out how to make her understand without causing a scene. Over the next few days, I tried different tactics. I mentioned casually that I liked using the spa early in the morning before work, hoping she'd get the hint that I wanted it to myself during those hours. I even left a note on the gate saying, "Private property. Please ask before entering." But nothing worked. If anything, Karen seemed more determined than ever to prove that she belonged there. One evening, she arrived with a friend in tow. "Surprise," she announced, gesturing dramatically to the woman beside her. "This is Linda. She's been dying to check out your spa." I stared at them, dumbfounded. "Karen, I didn't invite Linda," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I didn't invite you either." Her smile faltered for a split second, but then she brushed it off. "Oh, come on. Don't be such a stick in the mud. The more, the merrier, right?" That's when I realized something important. Karen didn't see my spa pool or my backyard as mine at all. To her, it was communal property, free for anyone to use whenever they pleased, and no amount of polite conversation was going to change her mind. As the weeks went by, her behavior only got worse. She started bringing food, drinks, even music speakers. One night, she lit candles around the edge of the spa, claiming it needed ambience. Another time, she brought a Bluetooth speaker and blasted loud pop songs while lounging in the water. Each visit felt like an invasion, a reminder that my space wasn't truly mine anymore. Neighbors began noticing too. Some would glance over their fences curiously, while others stopped to chat with Karen as if she were hosting her own private party. Meanwhile, I stood awkwardly on the sidelines, feeling like an outsider in my own home. It was exhausting. Every day, I dreaded coming home, wondering whether I'd find Karen waiting for me, or worse, already settled into my spa pool like it was her second living room. I knew I couldn't keep letting this happen. Something had to give. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished one of the longest weeks of my life. Work had been chaotic. Back-to-back meetings, endless emails, and a boss who seemed to think weekends were optional. All I wanted was to come home, slip into my spa pool, and let the warm water melt away the stress. For once, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd get the chance to relax in peace. I stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Everything felt calm. Until I heard voices. Loud, cheerful voices. My heart sank as I rounded the corner and saw Karen sitting in my spa pool, with 3 neighbors I barely knew. "Surprise," Karen called out when she spotted me, her arms spread wide like she'd just orchestrated some grand event. "We thought we'd throw an impromptu pool party." My jaw tightened, an asterisk impromptu pool party asterisk. In asterisk, my asterisk spa. Without asking. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There they were, lounging in my personal space, sipping drinks, laughing like old friends at a resort. And there I was, standing frozen, holding my towel, and wondering how things had spiraled so far out of control. For a moment, I just stared at them, trying to process the scene. Then I found my voice. "Karen, I said sharply, cutting through their laughter. What is going on here? She blinked at me, clearly not expecting me to sound upset. Oh hey, like I said, it's just a little get-together. No big deal. No big deal. I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. This isn't your spa, Karen. You can't just invite people over whenever you feel like it. Her expression shifted. Gone was the friendly smile. Instead, she looked annoyed, like I was ruining her fun on purpose. Relax, she said dismissively. It's just water. Besides, everyone's having a great time. That's not the point. I snapped, my patience finally snapping along with it. This is my property. My spa. You don't just show up uninvited and treat it like it's yours. It doesn't matter if it's just water. It matters that you're disrespecting my boundaries. The group fell silent, the laughter dying down as they exchanged awkward glances, but Karen didn't back down. Instead, she crossed her arms and gave me a smug look. You're making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be, she said coolly. Lighten up, okay? Sharing is good for the community spirit. Community spirit, I echoed incredulously. Karen, this has nothing to do with community spirit. This is about basic respect. If you wanted to have a party, why didn't you use your own backyard? Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a second, I thought she might actually argue. But then she shrugged, acting like none of this mattered. Fine. Whatever, she muttered. We'll leave. She climbed out of the spa, dripping water onto my patio, and gestured for her guests to follow. As they filed past me, avoiding eye contact, I felt a mix of anger and guilt. Was I being unreasonable? Should I have handled it differently? But deep down, I knew I wasn't wrong. No one should have to put up with this kind of behavior. After they left, I sat by the spa, staring at the ripples in the water. The peaceful evening I'd imagined was ruined, replaced by frustration and exhaustion. I realized something important in that moment. Polite conversations weren't going to work with Karen. She didn't care about my feelings or my boundaries. She only cared about getting what she wanted. And she wouldn't stop until I forced her to. That night, I lay awake thinking about what to do next. I couldn't keep letting her walk all over me. But how could I make her understand without causing a massive scene? Finally, an idea came to me, one that would either solve the problem or make things worse. Either way, I was done playing nice. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. It wasn't something I'd normally do. Okay, it was kind of extreme. But after everything Karen had put me through, I knew drastic measures were necessary. I couldn't keep letting her invade my space and disrupt my life. If she wouldn't respect my boundaries on her own, then I'd have to create boundaries that were impossible to ignore. I started by calling a local fencing company. When the guy arrived to give me an estimate, I explained exactly what I needed. A tall, sturdy fence around my backyard, complete with a locking gate. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask too many questions. By the end of the week, the work was done. The new fence stood 6 feet high, surrounding my yard like a fortress. It wasn't cheap, but every penny felt worth it just knowing Karen wouldn't be able to barge in anymore. The day the fence went up, I watched from my kitchen window as Karen stepped outside, coffee cup in hand. She froze when she saw the structure, her mouth dropping open. For a moment, she just stared at it, looking confused, or maybe offended. Then she marched straight over to my house, her heels clicking against the pavement. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing at the gate like it was some kind of personal insult. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet morning air. "It's a fence," I replied calmly, stepping onto my porch to face her, "to keep people out." Her eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Are you serious right now? You're going to lock me out of your spa?" "Yes," I said firmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Exactly." She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "This is ridiculous. Do you really think a fence is going to stop me from visiting? We're neighbors, for goodness sake." "We're not friends," I corrected her, my tone icy. And even if we were, being neighbors doesn't mean you can walk into my backyard whenever you feel like it. That's called trespassing. Karen blinked, clearly caught off guard by my bluntness. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback. Instead, she glared at me, her cheeks turning red. "You're making a huge mistake," she hissed. "Mark my words, you'll regret this." "Doubt it," I shot back, crossing my arms. "But thanks for the warning." She spun on her heel and stormed off, muttering under her breath. I watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and unease. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far. After all, fences usually implied hostility, and I didn't want to start a neighborhood feud. But another part of me, a bigger part, felt triumphant. Finally, I'd taken control of the situation. Finally, I'd set a clear boundary that Karen couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, I enjoyed my spa pool in peace for the first time in months. The fence made all the difference. I could sit outside without worrying about who might show up uninvited. I could soak in the warm water without interruptions or awkward conversations. It felt incredible, not just because I'd finally had my space back, but because I'd stood up for myself. Of course, Karen didn't disappear completely. She found other ways to make her presence known. One afternoon, I noticed her lingering near the fence, peeking through the slats like she was trying to figure out how to climb it. Another time, she parked her car directly in front of my driveway, blocking me in by accident. Each little act felt petty, designed to irritate me, but I refused to let it get to me. I'd already won the biggest battle, the one for my privacy. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done yet. She wasn't the type to give up easily, especially when she thought she was in the right. And while the fence had solved the immediate problem, I knew it hadn't ended the war. Not entirely. If I thought the fence would put an end to Karen's antics, I was sorely mistaken. She didn't just sulk and move on like normal people might. No, Karen wasn't about to let a little thing like a locked gate stop her. In fact, it seemed to fuel her determination even more. And that's when things got creative. It started small at first. One morning, as I stepped outside to enjoy my coffee, I noticed something odd. The lock on the gate had been tampered with. It looked scratched up, like someone had tried to pick it. My stomach dropped. Was it Karen? It had to be. Who else would try breaking into my backyard? I replaced the lock with a heavier-duty one, thinking that would solve the problem. But the next day, I found footprints in my flower beds near the fence. Fresh ones. Someone had been climbing over. When I peeked through the slats later that evening, I caught Karen mid-climb, her legs dangling awkwardly as she struggled to hoist herself onto the top of the fence. "Karen," I shouted, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "What are you doing?" She froze, her face turning bright red as she teetered precariously on the edge. For a second, I thought she might fall, but she quickly scrambled down and disappeared into her yard without saying a word. I stood there stunned. Did she really think she could just climb over my fence whenever she wanted? Apparently, yes. But Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself, or me. Over the next few days, she kept trying, and failing, to breach my fortress. Once, I saw her dragging a stepladder from her garage, clearly planning to use it to scale the fence. Another time, she brought a folding chair, stacking it precariously against the wooden panels. Each attempt ended the same way, me yelling at her to get down, and her retreating with muttered complaints. The neighbors began noticing, of course. Some of them giggled behind their hands when they saw Karen teetering on her makeshift ladder. Others shook their heads, whispering about how unneighborly I was being. A few even came to her defense, telling me I should let her swim since she'd gotten so used to using the spa. One afternoon, Mrs. Thompson from across the street pulled me aside. "You know," she said gently, "maybe you're being a bit harsh. Karen's harmless. Why not just share?" I stared at her, incredulous. Harmless. She's trespassing on my property. Would you let someone break into your house because they're harmless? Mrs. Thompson blinked, taken aback by my tone. and walked away without another word. Still, her comment stuck with me. Was I the bad guy here? Had I overreacted by putting up the fence? I wrestled with these thoughts for days, but every time I pictured Karen lounging in my spa pool like it was hers, my resolve hardened. This wasn't about sharing, it was about respect, and Karen had none for me or my property. Things escalated further when Karen filed a noise complaint with the HOA. Yes, a noise complaint. She claimed the sound of my spa jets disturbed her sleep. I couldn't believe it. The jets were quieter than a running faucet, and her bedroom was on the opposite side of her house. Clearly, this was retaliation, her way of punishing me for daring to stand up to her. When the HOA sent me a letter asking me to address the issue, I wrote back explaining the situation. I included photos of Karen's attempted break-ins and even sent a video clip of her climbing the fence. To my relief, the HOA dropped the matter, but the damage was done. Now everyone in the neighborhood knew about our feud. Despite everything, I refused to back down. If Karen wanted to act like a child, fine, but I wasn't going to let her ruin my life. Every failed attempt to invade my backyard only made my point clearer. My space was mine, and no amount of scheming or drama would change that. Karen's antics reached a new level of absurdity one afternoon, and honestly, it was the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a sitcom, not real life. I came home from running errands to find her sitting in a lawn chair planted squarely in the middle of my driveway. Not near it, not close to it, right in the center, like she was staking her claim. "What are you doing?" I asked, stopping in my tracks. My car was still idling behind me, and I could feel my patience wearing thin before she even opened her mouth. She turned to look at me, her expression smug. "I'm protesting," she declared, as if this made perfect sense. "Your fence is ruining community spirit." "Community spirit?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean trespassing on private property?" She ignored my question and crossed her arms defiantly. "Until you take down that ridiculous fence, I'm staying put." For a moment, I just stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or scream. Was she serious? Did she really think blocking my driveway would somehow force me to give in? The audacity of it all was mind-boggling. "Well, good luck with that," I said dryly, stepping out of my car and walking past her toward the house. I wasn't about to let her ruin my day or waste any more energy arguing with her. If she wanted to sit there like a stubborn child, so be it. Inside, I grabbed a snack and decided to wait her out. Sure enough, within 10 minutes, she stormed into my living room without knocking. "This isn't over," she snapped, pointing a finger at me. "You're being selfish, and everyone knows it." "Selfish?" I shot back, finally losing my cool. "How am I being selfish? This is my house, my spa, and my fence. You don't get to decide how I use them." She glared at me, her face red with anger. "Fine. But don't think for a second that people aren't talking about you. They're saying you're unneighborly, rude, and stuck up." "Let them talk," I said firmly, crossing my arms. "Because I'd rather have the whole neighborhood hate me than let someone like you walk all over me." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might say something else. Instead, she turned on her heel and marched out, slamming the door behind her. As soon as she was gone, I sank onto the couch, feeling both drained and strangely victorious. For once, I hadn't backed down. I'd stood my ground, no matter how ridiculous the situation became. Over the next few days, Karen tried other petty tactics to annoy me. She parked her car directly in front of my house again, leaving notes claiming it was by accident. She complained to the HOA about every little thing: the color of my curtains, the placement of my trash cans, even the sound of my lawnmower. Each complaint felt like another attempt to wear me down, but I refused to engage. Let her file her reports. None of them held water anyway. Slowly but surely, Karen began to lose steam. Her protests fizzled out, her complaints went unanswered by the HOA, and her attempts to rally the neighbors against me fell flat. People may have whispered about me behind my back, but they also saw how unreasonable she was being. One by one, they stopped siding with her. By the end of the month, Karen had retreated into herself, or at least she stopped targeting me. Occasionally, I'd catch her glaring at my fence from her yard, but she never tried climbing it again. It was as though she'd finally accepted that she couldn't win. Looking back, I realized that standing up to Karen wasn't just about protecting my property. It was about proving to myself that I deserved respect. And while the battle had been exhausting, it taught me something important. Sometimes, you have to fight for your peace, even if it means making waves. Life in my little house finally settled into a rhythm I could enjoy again. The spa pool, once a source of endless frustration, became what it was always meant to be, a peaceful retreat. With the fence firmly in place and Karen's antics winding down, I found myself looking forward to evenings spent soaking in the warm water, listening to the gentle hum of the jets, and watching the stars peek out from behind the trees. It felt like victory, even if it came at a cost. Karen still popped up now and then, though her appearances were less dramatic and more awkward. Sometimes I'd spot her pacing near the fence, glancing over like she was plotting her next move. Other times, she'd accidentally bump into me while walking her dog, offering stilted small talk that neither of us really wanted to have. But she never tried to climb the fence again, or park herself in my driveway. Whatever spark had fueled her crusade seemed to have burned itself out. The neighborhood gossip eventually died down too. At first, people whispered about how unfriendly I was being, but as time went on, they started seeing things differently. A few neighbors even admitted, quietly, of course, that Karen had gone too far. One woman, Mrs. Allen, pulled me aside during a block party and said, "You handled that situation well. She can be a lot." I smiled politely, grateful for the rare moment of validation. But honestly, I didn't care much about what others thought anymore. What mattered was that I'd reclaimed my space and my sanity. Looking back, I realized just how much Karen's behavior had affected me. For months, I'd walked on eggshells, dreading every knock at the door or unexpected visitor in my backyard. I'd let her take away my peace, my privacy, and even my confidence. But standing up to her, even when it meant building a literal barrier, had changed everything. I wasn't just protecting my property, I was reclaiming my power. Of course, there were moments when I wondered if I'd handled things differently. Maybe I could have avoided all the drama. Should I have been firmer earlier, or maybe kinder? But deep down, I knew that nothing short of the fence would have stopped Karen. She thrived on pushing boundaries, testing limits, and inserting herself where she didn't belong. Polite conversations and friendly requests wouldn't have worked because, at her core, Karen didn't respect boundaries, at least not mine. Now, whenever I step outside and see that tall wooden fence surrounding my yard, I feel a sense of pride. It's not just a structure. It's a symbol of resilience, a reminder that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it feels uncomfortable or confrontational. And while I'll always prefer harmony over conflict, I learned an important lesson. Peace isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to compromise it for anyone. These days, Karen keeps her distance, though she occasionally shoots dirty looks at the fence. Honestly, I don't blame her for being upset. I ruined her favorite hangout spot. But I also know she brought this on herself. If she'd respected my wishes from the beginning, none of this would have happened. As for me, I'm happier than I've been in a long time. My spa pool is exactly what it should be, a personal oasis where I can escape the chaos of the world. And while I hope I never have to deal with another Karen, I know one thing for sure. If someone else ever tries to invade my space, I won't hesitate to draw the line. Because at the end of the day, everyone deserves a place to call their own. And I'm done sharing mine without permission.